Hi guys. Thank you all for coming to NodeConf. It's been a great time for me personally. I hope it's been a great time for you as well. So my name is Saltrick Meyer. I'm a front-end engineer at BuzzFeed in New York. Although we also have engineering offices in London, if you're interested in that sort of thing. So this is basically a talk about sharing front-end code. And now, why on earth would you want to ever share front-end code? Well, here are some reasons. You serve developers outside your organization. You develop many front-end applications, possibly for clients. Your front-end consists of multiple applications, but you want a unified look and feel, or you just want to share code between them. Or you want your front-end code to be reusable. Even if you were the only person working on it, you could easily imagine wanting to share with yourself, with your future self. So in BuzzFeed's case, this is us. We are in the situation of having a front end that consists of multiple applications. And what do I mean by that? I mean that if you go to BuzzFeed.com, where none of the images have been loading for some reason, it's not glorious. But so this is our main page, and this is one application called Feed Pager. And then if I go over this border to one of the article pages, I have actually gone to a different application. But you wouldn't know that, right? Based on the fonts, based on the colors, based on hopefully every single, also, and not just the fonts and colors, but the UX elements that we have there should act exactly the same no matter what application you're on, so that our users can navigate the site extremely quickly and without having anything betray their expectations. So the solution for you might be a component library. And okay, so why can't you just put every JavaScript snippet into an NPM module, just bundle them all together, package it out? Well, because you need some organizing principle if you're going to be able to share things effectively. A bucket is very nice if you're the only person who uses that bucket and you know everything in there. You know everything that's in your backpack. But the organization of your backpack, just something where you know everything that's in there personally, is not going to work very well if you are working with a whole bunch of people. And at BuzzFeed, we have probably around 100 developers, so that's enough to make it very hard. So what is a component library? Well, here's a quote. So a component library, going back to the BuzzFeed example, though, a lot of things here that you could consider to be a component. These images are killing me, guys, I swear to God. Tragic. Anyway, so you can see that this component-based design pattern has really become an article of faith for us. So right here we got kind of a component, should be an ad. Who cares about ads though? This pretty pink list looks like a component. All of these little cards here are components. This one, is that a component, or could it be split up into more components? That's where we literally start splitting hairs. But in the meantime, thinking about your website as a series of components is a great way of breaking it down from just a bunch of pages or apps that are too large to reason with and too large to share into something that both designers and developers can use as an empowering experience for them. So let me tell you a little bit more about BuzzFeed's experience. We used to be on a monolith as recently as 2 years ago. We had one app. It was originally written in Perl. Some Perl still does exist. If you like 700-line switch statements in your templating, truly delightful. But we moved out from that, and we also moved to a container-based development and deployment environment. At the same time, our front end began to split apart from one application into a multiplicity of applications. And one thing that we did have kind of at the beginning of the process of coming to a component library was a style guide, like a true living style guide with like a CSS system in place that kind of had gotten us used to the idea that you're a developer, don't write your own stuff, we have utilities here for you, and also the notion that we were going to start developing the tools that we needed to do our jobs ourselves. And we're not like going out to write a framework. We're going to write like style guides and component libraries. That's about our speed at a publisher. So we used to have, like I said, we used to have a monolithic web app. We now have, a mono repo still, but that monorepo contains 472 different services. And that number is inflated somewhat because some of those are like the auth proxies for different apps. But you can see that the microservices has really been a model that works well for us here. We have one really, really, really good containerization solution. I don't know about you, but I had a lot of jobs in the past where people were like, maybe we're going to get onto Docker sometime soon. I really hope so. Well, we actually have like an ECS-based, the problem of it works on my machine has pretty much disappeared for us due to this wonderful thing called rig. Like, if you want to Google that, I'm going to leave this up in case anyone Googles it very quickly because it's a really heckin' good system. It's a great joy for developers, and that makes me very proud of the people who worked on it at BuzzFeed. Okay, so here we have this page. Now this is what it looks like with all the images. See, this is why you take screenshots. That's great. And we, like I said, at the beginning of having those two different applications, some for serving lists of articles and some for serving the articles of themselves, we wanted to share innumerable things between them. Obviously, they have to have the same header. They have to have the same logos. A lot of the UX elements have to be the same. And we were copying and pasting, and that was as recently as about a year ago. So that obviously stopped working extremely soon. And you can think of all the reasons why that would happen. You break something on one, you have not broken it on the other. You get test coverage up on one, but you haven't improved it on the other side. You've made some elements on one of these applications accessible, haven't made them accessible on the other side. Why waste work when you can do work that will prevent you from wasting work in the future? So we really did need a solution to this problem. It was becoming an issue for our front-end developers, but we had somebody to solve it for us. This is a guy named Ian Feather. He's a really fabulous dude. He used to work at Lonely Planet, where he made 3 separate attempts at getting a component library together. Which is a lot. So clearly this is a problem that he's thought about, and also clearly it's not an easy problem, because let me tell you, Ian is very smart, and if it were an easy problem, he would have found it easy to solve. So he has a great talk on this, actually from 2014, and this is sort of one of the, I think, earlier versions of it, but he also has a blog post. And to hear him say it, the reasons that he had prior failures, the first time, the technology wasn't really there. We weren't in a world yet where it was very easy to share front-end code. This is probably something like 2012. God, I don't even remember 2012. And then the second time, it just didn't get buy-in. So buy-in is a very important issue for all of this. But the third time, it kind of worked out. It became something like what we had here. Similarly, at BuzzFeed, we had actually tried to make a component library of our own. But in a mono repo, we didn't really have a reason to have a component library. Or sorry, not in a monorepo, in a monolithic web app. In a monorepo, there's plenty of reason to have a component library. So even the best technology is worth nothing if it does not come at the right time for an organization. No matter if we had made exactly the same technical choices in our previous iteration of component library, it would have been meaningless because we weren't in a context where it was necessary for people to use a component library. So what the heck is, we call them Buzzbox. Did I even mention that? We call them Buzzbox. It's terrible working at BuzzFeed because pretty much everything, we reuse the words like buzz and feed and block and article just endlessly. It becomes a little bit of word soup. But this is what you would find if you, so Buzzbox is of course in our mono repo. It exists both as a front-end package and as a service. Which can be run independently. And running that service does 2 things. It runs tests on the service, and it also can run it as a gallery, which we'll get back to later. So if you were to take a peep inside that repo, you would see these things. You would see a directory of components. You would see a directory of docs, fonts, images, JavaScript, which largely means like services. And we're using a framework on BuzzFeed.com called T3. If you've ever heard of it, I would be shocked to pieces because nobody has, not D3 or anything, T3. So that's like T3 modules and services. Then we have some Sass, and then snippets, which is basically like the kind of inline JavaScript snippets for polyfills and stuff like that we certainly wouldn't ever want to rewrite or have come out of sync between our apps. Like, can you imagine somebody goes to a different site and gets a different version of an analytics script? Not that we run a lot of third-party analytics scripts. It's not good stuff. Okay, so how do we actually define a component? Because I think items 2 through 7 here may be fairly explanatory. Number 1 is less so. So we actually have quite strict standards for what qualifies as a component at BuzzFeed. And one of the first things that we have is a component definition, which is a YAML file that looks something like this. And this is quite a simple component. You can imagine it's like a little add yours button. And it has, we try to define an API for it, which is some parameters that must be passed in or might be passed in for this to work. And then we move on to, so we need to have a JavaScript file, clearly. We need a server-side template, a client-side template, and a Sass file. Oh, I forgot one item there. We need a test. You cannot put a BuzzBlock in unless it is a test. We use Jasmine tests. Not controversial there. So you'll often find if a client-side template is being rendered from inside our JavaScript, that can be done fairly easily using, like we have a module rendering service. You can imagine the sort of stuff that does, just concatenating some HTML in. And then we also, if you want to pop a module into your server-side template, we have a fairly cute way of doing this. You just have the data module is specified right here as add yours. And then all the configuration options for that module are defined in a little script tag. And this makes it incredibly easy to put one of these components on any page that you would like as a developer. And then, we use Jinja templating, so you can use the options that you've defined inside there. All well and good. So the why of a component library is also the how. We have developers who are trying not to spend too much time on work that has already been done. We have developers who are trying to use the best practices of the people around them. And what we want people to do is look at anything that exists on our sites anywhere and say, okay, I want one of those. I want to be able to put it over here. I want to compose them in a different shape than they existed in previously. And do that without actually having to write much of anything. Hopefully, like almost no JavaScript and just a little bit of HTML. So who actually works on Buzzbox? Because we have quite a lot of front-end developers. Is Buzzbox the responsibility of every single one of them? Well, no. So this is a guy named Jack, and this is a guy named Artyom, and they are members of our front-end infrastructure team. And that team's sole focus is on developing tools and processes that make the lives of all the other front-end developers at BuzzFeed easier. And also on making sure that those tools are performant and accessible, and kind of maintaining a high standard for all the code that we write. So Jack and Artyom have done a lot of the heavy lifting on Buzzbox. And it was Artyom who coded up what I think is the real secret to Buzzbox's success, which has been significant. And that is Buzzbox. Yep. All right. Here we go. This is a gallery of Buzzbox. So a lot of them don't. Yep. All right. So we've got something like a feed-featured breaking card. And as you can see, these configuration options are basically what's defined in that API field of that config.yaml. These are, you can link out to, this is an isolated version of that component, so you can see it without all of that context of the gallery around it. And you can define as many examples as you want. Basically, more complex components with more options, you should put in more examples. And we're also, as Buzzbox has become, I don't want to say a victim of its own success, but certainly getting to the point where people are throwing components into it because they need it very quickly, and we start to lose that battle a little of, oh, we want to keep standards high, but this person had to get that thing in for deadline, so you can't blame them for not having gotten stuff to be really good in it. So we're trying to make a distinction between those components that exist largely because we have to share code between our front ends, and those components that are real examples of what Buzzbox should be. And now, is that a very uncomfortable place to be in? Yes, but this is an evolving process. So one thing that's cool that I do want to point out to you is that we're starting to work on these primitive components. Stuff like bylines, which, we're a publisher. It's very important to us. Logo, kind of incredibly important, and having the ability just to get one of those in there without and specifying all of the visual treatments of it that are acceptable by our brand guidelines makes it so that nobody is ever going to, oh shit, I gotta get an icon in there. I'm just gonna go find an SVG, get it off the website. Oops. And we're trying to build these primitive components from the 3 that we have right now to something much more extensive that can kind of cover all of the common use cases across our site. So with something like that, with a project like this, documentation is essential because we have a lot of developers. People are switching between teams. People are newly joining the company, and they are always asking, how on earth do I start working with this? So we have currently around 5 different pieces of documentation, from a README to a contributing guide, which contains all the specifications for what those Buzzbox should be. And additionally, for not just the components, but for all of the other things that we include in Buzzbox, such as the guidelines on fonts, guidelines on what you should do with an SVG before you pop it in here. Because you can never assume that even if you've hired some very smart people, that they know everything that you want them to know about a project like this. And if you don't write it down, you have no right to tell them that they did it wrong. So we also have a usage doc for people who aren't even intending to contribute, just to use our stuff. We have a naming doc, because as we all know, the only 2 hard problems in comp sci are naming things and cache invalidation. And we have an FAQ, because we just need that much. And I have been on the hook to write a style guide for about 8 months now, like a SAS guide. Yeah, I wrote this talk instead. If it isn't, I might have mentioned before, this is an NPM module. So then how do you actually develop on this locally? Because you can do it, we have this NPM module that we're using within a bunch of different applications. Even the Buzzbox service, I believe, is just using that NPM module as part of its bundle. So we need to have a system for people to be able to edit stuff in place and develop it in place in an application. Whether that's the best, whether you should start from in context or whether you should start without context for when developing a component, I'm going to be agnostic about that right now. Can anyone read this? My font size kind of went down here. All right, so that no-limit resources is very important because that beautiful containerization solution I mentioned, running Webpack in a container is lots of fun. You will realize that memory management is still a real thing in this world. And so we basically have a configuration option which tells the application to look first in a set of local node modules rather than looking in, to look first for the Buzzbox defined in that monorepo. Which we all have checked out, rather than looking in the bundled node modules of that application. So you do need something like this to make development as easy as possible. And I just want to say, this local FE modules equals true is probably the config option that the front-end infra people spend the most time debugging with people. But it's worth it. So you have a successful component system. Congratulations. Lots of people are using it. They're having fun with it. And then stuff starts going wrong because one person, changed that API. One person did a bug fix which caused a bug on somebody else's usage of that component. Now, sure, that should never happen because we're all going to code things so that they're ironclad. No, that's never going to happen. So we need semver. I need semver. You need semver. basically, this is one of the things that it has been a little bit of education for people, because you still, when you're contributing to Buzzbox, obviously you have to update. Oh, we have a changelog. We have a changelog, and you have to decide on what version number your your changes to the package correspond to. And you know, adopting an existing standard for something like this, especially one that is as like sort of broadly important to the community as Semver, I think has a great effect for education, and also reduces arguments. Nobody really argues with this. So obviously we love NPM. This is an NPM package. We have a webhook that publishes every commit that touches the Buzzbox part of that monorepo and has a successful build in that whole containerization deployment and development and deployment solution. Is actually published as a test package in NPM. This did not used to be the case. We used to be sending each other Slack DMs, constantly asking, "Can you publish me an NPM version? Can you publish me a test version? Oh no, we published the wrong version. But you know, automation, as you know, is the greatest guardrail. Don't ever leave anything in the hands of humans when you can make it automated. So one thing that is very important with this is the trust budget. Developers, I really do think, get much angrier when you break their process than when you break their product. So if Buzzbox, for whatever reason, stops working, if it stops building, if you cannot run that application anymore, then that reduces the level of trust in the project as a whole. And that means that people might be likely to say, okay, I shouldn't do this as a Buzzblock because I can't rely on that system. So when you are in the position that the maintainers of this project are, you have to be incredibly responsive to people's needs. You have to anticipate their needs. You have to go further and you have to consider the ease of their use of this product as your highest goal as a contributor. Okay, so how do you not break things? Like, actually though, practically. All right, unit tests. We have already discussed how each Buzzblock is required to have a Jasmine unit test. And you know, we actually do look at the coverage stats for those. So we also have snapshot testing for our markup. And lastly, so visual regression for CSS used to be really quite difficult and flaky, and it still kind of is. But we've stopped using Phantom. There's no more Phantom. Headless Chrome is, I think, a much better option these days. And also, you should probably do your visual regression on a component-by-component basis rather than doing it for an entire page. You're a lot less likely to have things go wrong when you're only doing like 200 by 200 pixels instead of like 1024 by 8000 or something. So the Slack channel is actually one of the most important parts of the project because this is all about communication, and we have two, one for contributing and one for usage. Nobody ever really gets the distinction between them. We could probably do with having one. But the point is that it has to be obvious where people can go to for help and who actually owns this stuff. And so the people who work on this need to be very visible to kind of their constituents. So one thing that is hard about this is that developers need to know where the code that they're changing is being used. The thing that I personally do for this, I'm going back. Too far back. So I like literally, when I change one of these, I grep for this like data module definition and see all the places that it's used. It's an unreliable system. And that's because we haven't really figured out how to do this yet. We haven't really figured out how to make sure that people know all the places that they are changing stuff. The gallery obviously helps a lot, but you cannot always prevent integration regressions. So the success of a project like this, like I said, can be measured by developer buy-in. And that's something that I think we've done very well at. There are something like 40 components now. And so many, in fact, that people are having to take a step back and say, are we doing well enough at keeping these to a high standard? Are these like the components that we want to have? Or are they just the components that we do have? But the thing is that I think that's okay. This is a process, not a product. It may look like a product because you actually get like an NPM module with some version at the end of it, but that is in fact like the least important thing. What's really important is having this process of collaboration and this where we understand how our code affects each other, and we see our site not as a bunch of individual tasks for developers, but as a set of building blocks that we all work on together. Not even building blocks, but like tools that we all make together. And basically what happens when you work on this is that you're the community manager of an internal open source library. So the question might be, okay, so should we just open source this? I don't see how it would help anyone else. I mean, if it did, then it would certainly be a good idea to. But there's a lot to be said for treating internal projects with the same high standards that you would treat open source projects. It will save you a lot of time down the road when you are sort of living up to those standards. Yeah. So to quote Jack, it's not a bad project, but it's not a fun project. Jack, bless him, he spends a lot of time running around after people and apologizing for breaking things. He's a wonderful developer, and it's a pleasure to work with him. And another great quote from him, 99% of this is people. I was asking both Jack and Ian what like the greatest technical challenge had been while they were working on this project. They couldn't even really think of it. Because that's so much not what matters when you are working on something that affects this many people. It's literally just about how you can best serve the needs of the people who are your colleagues. So, like, what's next for Buzzbox? Well, this lovely person is actually the future of Buzzbox. Emily is the designer that we have on that front-end infrastructure team. So why does an infrastructure team need a designer? Well, because being able to distribute design is a core part of our developer experience. So our goal for Buzzbox is to go from an engineering solution to a design system. Buzzbox basically exists because we had an engineering problem we needed to solve, but we want to take it to the next level where we have truly broken down the site into a whole bunch of components. The designers are aware of how to develop them. The designers are comfortable working with a component-based system, and they think component first. Now, like, this is probably not the most intuitive way for a lot of designers to work. You know, designers, they go kind of page first with that sketch mockup, almost always. But that's why it's our job as developers to make it as easy as possible for them with tools like the gallery, by making these components as accessible to develop on as possible. We want to make it so that with just HTML and CSS, you can go in and make all the necessary changes. And that's kind of our dream for Buzzbox to kind of pass out of our control as engineers and into the control of our design colleagues. So you're a translator between humans and computers when you're a developer. And in this case, though, you're a translator between developer needs and design needs also. And it's a cool position to be in, even if it is sometimes a little bit rough. Every technical problem, I can't emphasize this enough, every technical problem is a human problem at scale. Thank you.